Welcome to the IMS Global CLR Roundtable, Learn and Lead. Today's focus will be on the models for how to strategize your CLR readiness. And we have three panelists joining us today, and I'll introduce each of them and then provide just a quick overview before I turn it over to them for them to share their information. If you're interested, you can sign in at this link to get any copy of the resources we share today, as well as the recording. So our panelists today are Susan Donat, who is the Director of Curriculum and Assistant Director of Assessment for the Misfit University. Then we have Mark McConaughay, who is the Assistant Vice Provost and Registrar for Indiana University, and Meena Naik from the University of North Texas and the Career Connect Program Director. So those three panelists today will be sharing some of the models they've used to strategize their CLR programs and information to help you get started in your program. So this event is a monthly forum. So we had our first event in June. That recording is available for you on our CLR event page, which is linked on the slides there. That was a good overview of the what and why of CLR, so we won't cover that as deeply today. So if you're new to the CLR world, I would encourage you to go back and look at that previous recording. Also in the chat, I did put a link to the attendance, and this we use just to follow up with a copy of the recording, as well as any resources we share during our conversation today. So a little background on the digital credentials ecosystem and how the comprehensive learner record fits in. So the comprehensive learner record is really designed to bring together all learning that happens for our learners from K-12 to higher ed, as well as employers who are offering learning opportunities. And this is going to be a way for them to show their digital and verifiable skills in degrees, certificates, competencies, courses, badges. A wealth of different types of learning and competencies and achievements can be reflected in that comprehensive learner record, which makes it a little bit stronger than some of our existing records that we have. So just to give a little clarification for what this really means for higher education, is a comprehensive learner record is an official institutional record issued to students. It's a record that focuses on learning that occurs throughout the educational experience. So not only coursework, but also co-curricular experiences, learning experiences that may occur at the same time as the educational experience, but outside the institution's oversight. All of that type of experience can be reflected in a comprehensive learner record. And as we know, that type of learning is really what makes our students successful, is the full learning experience that they get at our institutions. So records may focus on any of these, but they go beyond rosters of courses and activities or experiences to really have evidence of that learning process. And the Comprehensive Learner Record standard is what is enabling this environment. So ACRO actually took some time to review the standard and have said that this is really the only standard currently available that meets the needs for a CLR to be transmitted between different platforms. It has been developed by our IMS Global members. So these are institutional members as well as technology suppliers who work together to really figure out what the needs of institutions are and how they can be met through this standard. This standard is currently available, so if you're an institution looking at implementing a CLR and looking for a technology partner to work with, make sure you're looking for one that is supporting the standard and is committed to implementing it. These standards need to be documented so that they can really give context to how the standard is applied to various academic and co-curricular learning experiences. And you can learn more about it at the IMS Global website.
So Misfit University is a private university of the liberal and applied arts. We're relatively small. We have about 2,700 undergraduate students, but we have a wide variety of programs, as you can see. We have 87 undergraduate traditional majors. We have 30 graduate degree programs and certificates, including at the PhD level. And we also have, we've just recently launched 2 adult degree program completions. Next slide, please. So the way that we approached the CLRs was to really first focus on building our infrastructure. And we did that through our assessment of student learning. We leveraged that area first. So one of our first things that we worked with was revising our institutional learning outcomes, making sure that they were clear and succinctly stated. And in doing so, we reduced those from 53, yes, you're not seeing a typo, it really was 53, down to 6. And then we had all of our programs work on revising and aligning their program learning outcomes with those 6 institutional outcomes. And that was a very large endeavor because we were working across all of the programs, across all of the university. After that, we also implemented our assessment management tool. And our assessment management tool really gave us the impetus to keep our momentum moving forward, because part of getting that tool up and running, we had to review and revise all of our course learning objectives and ensure that they were mapped to the program outcomes. And we also needed to identify signature learning assignments or artifacts, things that students could demonstrate what they could know and do. And everything was mapped all in our assessment tool. So go ahead in the next slide, please. Then basically this is a vision of how we keep things moving forward in regards to this type of initiative. My partner in crime, Kate Wilkins, she and I developed this model, and we work with this to really sustain the change over time. This is built off of 3 different common leadership theories. So the movement part of it is based off of transactional leadership. That's where we talk about really using a pragmatic approach of short-term tasks, and we're really listening and leveraging our position and trying to do some transactional give and take to make things happen on the campus. Then we tag that onto the motivation aspect, which is based on transformational leadership. This is where we're really trying to inspire belief in the vision. We're working with different units across campus to motivate them of why this vision is worth the growing pains to move towards. And we're really careful in this area to craft our language to capture what matters most to those different partners, and then to make sure we're looking at the world from their worldview, because we all in our disciplinary areas have our own way of perceiving what matters most in our jobs. Then the third area is momentum, which we really lean on heavily, and this is based off of distributed leadership. And this is the part that gives us the lasting and sustained change, because we divide out the tasks so that there's not just one person championing your incentive forward, it's shared across campus. And to do this, we try to link it to existing initiatives on campus so that it doesn't appear like we're adding on one more thing. We simply piggyback on things that already have buy-in, and that helps the movement be sustained and long-lasting. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So at Messiah, we're currently working on building buy-in. We've got our infrastructure in place, and now we're working on partnering with campus stakeholders. We want to make sure that we're all on the same page now with what do we mean by certificates. And we've got a pilot going to be able to extend certificates for adult learners and our traditional undergraduate students. We're working with our student affairs area to develop badges for that co-curricular aspect of Messiah. We have co-curricular learning objectives that we would like to be developing badges for. And we'll also develop a badge for our experiential learning requirement, which is a graduation requirement at Messiah. Now, to accomplish this, we're going to really rely heavily on our governance process. And that for us is very much an iterative process where you have your initial idea, you take it to the leader in that particular area, and you share that vision and you obtain feedback and you uncover the objections that they have. What are the stumbling points? And really listen deeply to why they are objecting, like what part of it is getting that friction. And then we recast our vision to take those points into consideration. And it's super important that we recast it because otherwise we're not going to get the buy-in. And then finally, we reframe the proposal with all of those points in mind and then move it through governance. And we repeat as necessary when we get stuck at a specific layer of governance, because I'm sure you guys never experienced that at all. And so where we are at Messiah is we've got this infrastructure and now we're ready to move forward, but we're trying to move forward very strategically with these pilots that are identified and making sure that before we push this into governance, we're really setting ourselves up for success. So that would be what's going on at Messiah College. I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
Alrighty. Well, Susan, it was great to hear about all of that. We have a similar approach, I would say, but you flip out some of the terminology, and at the core of it, it's really similar. So at UNT, we're a large Tier 1 research university. We have, I think we're on the cusp of 40,000 students that we're working with, over 200 some odd degrees that we have if you consider undergraduate and graduate. And one of the things that really makes our work a little bit interesting is the way that we're having to distribute across so many different areas and work almost in a decentralized model, because you can't ask this many faculty and staff on campus to do a thing. They look at us like we're crazy if we come into a room and do that. And so the way that we kind of leaned on this whole process and the work that we went into this with is, one thing I'll caveat it with is that Career Connect is our campus's quality enhancement plan. That's kind of how we started. And we hope to be around far further along than the QEP lasts on campus for reaccreditation. But essentially what we did is we kind of looked at what would support the actual work being done on campus and support the quality of instruction, student learning needs, and so on. And my colleague, Dr. Mike Simmons, was the big sort of, years ago envisioned this idea with other colleagues on campus and has led us forward. And essentially where we landed was on this idea of marketable skills. And so if you go on to the next slide, Kelly, what you'll see is that we have 8 marketable skills. So we looked beyond the university, right? How better to create reason on a campus than to say that others are looking for something, say that this is something that higher education almost needs to prove a little bit more of. And so we went out, looked at NACE competencies, looked at what employers were wanting from our students and consistently saying that students don't do, right? They consistently come back and say students are lacking these as they graduate and come into employment. They're lacking skills like communication, critical thinking, the ability to work in teams, and so on. And so we leaned on these ideas, which also strategically happen to lean on what we already need to do as a university. And by that, I mean within the state of Texas, with the Higher Ed Coordinating Board, some of these skills are already evaluated and required to be reported on for the purposes of the state, for the purposes of our gen ed requirements. And so wrapping it all together, we're able to come in and say, this work is already happening. Let's see if we can capture it. Let's see if we can help students see it. Let's see if we can make this meaningful to employers. So if you hit the next, to the next area. What this meant for us was actually leaning on open badges. So we went the route of digital badging and micro-credentialing for a few different reasons. One, we really liked that it was open. It was something that a student can carry forward, and then in the future, if they come across a different kind of credentialing mechanism, the open badges still go with them. It's still something they can carry. It's still something that's validated and verified. And it gave us some of the flexibility that we needed to be able to build this into the curriculum. The other thing that it led us sort of down a path that we didn't know we were necessarily heading down when we first started this is being able to actually map into the different learning outcomes to a level that we can look at different dimensions of a learning outcome. We can say that in this course, in this experience, this outcome is met this way. And then in another one, it's met another way. And if you put those together, they're actually now meeting this entire competency in a way that, they're a part of each one is met in different experiences. And so we leaned on these open badges. We are then also able to expand far beyond curricular work and landed on this idea of a stacked credential model. And so if you hit the next one, the stacked credential model for us has actually leaned on high impact practices. So we took something that, again, strategically, we don't have to argue why these matter on campus. Across higher education, if you talk about high impact practices, it's an easy sell. The hard part is convincing people to do it, but why it matters is less of an argument. Why we should be doing it, less of an argument. The skills, less of an argument. We already have to report it for the state. Easy to map that as an outcome that we need to do. And hey, by the way, employers also care about it. Take that a little bit more, and it became a conversation of, are we not willing to kind of now allow students to carry this evidence forward? And then the sell for us became helping them collect this evidence and actually looking at it over the course of time, that it's not a single instance that a student does a thing, learns a thing, and we can check it off. It's that this happens over the course of time. And so what you actually start to see is the stacked model that allows a student to grow a skill over the course of their entire journey through the university. And it's both curricular and co-curricular opportunities. the learning outcomes are already agreed upon because they're things we already report. And what our role then becomes is a bit of transparency and a bit of translation. And so where we kind of went from here was taking this whole process into building these credential pathways. And so with our vendor, which is Concentric Sky, we actually went in, and if you hit to the next slide, Kelly, and built out what a pathway could look like. So this is our back-end view. This is like an administrator view. Students have access to this, but what we by and large found from them is they don't understand it. It looks like a degree plan. But essentially what you'll see in here is that different skills and competencies are outlined. You'll notice that they also align up to a lot of the bigger credentials that we were talking about on the previous slides. And what these faculty then went and did is identified the learning outcomes in their curriculum down to where it's evaluated and said, yeah, we'll tell students that this is where they're learning a thing. And so now, because of the way the integrations work and some of that, it's allowed us to go to scale and actually allow for these assessments to occur in real time, which then signals to the student over the course of time, every time they take a class and complete something, that they're learning a skill. The example that we show here is for French, and the reason that we actually picked that one is when we talk about needing to show viability in the market, when we talk about students needing to articulate what they do and why they do it, is there a more ambiguous place than what do I do with the degree in French if I'm not going to speak or teach French for the rest of my life? And so does this now give them a tool and a mechanism to translate that learning far beyond what they might do on their own? And this back-end view is for us. It's what allows us to map into the learning outcomes. It allows us to actually show the stack over time. The view for the students is actually a dashboard because, again, they don't understand this. And so one of our biggest strategic needs was to get the student to understand what they're looking at. And so if you hit to the next one, Kelly, this dashboard view became something that was built over time, but it's actually made a big difference. So students who've seen this, we have this live with students right now, they see this and they're able to understand, they get it. When faculty see the pathway, they get it. So now we're catering to different audiences and making sure that they understand why this is happening. But when students see this, what they're starting to see is I'm learning something, I'm 20% of the way there in this skill. The badge itself carries a lot of the data that they need to translate it out. And it allows for a lot more of that communication to happen. And then the learner record, which is the last view that we'll share here, allows for them to actually have something they can control and share out that's verified by the university, that they own and control, but that we're kind of giving them alongside the degree that they get, alongside a lot of this other work. And the nice thing across all of this, and what our biggest goal was in doing any of this work, was to show that it's the entirety of the student experience that contributes to what the students are learning. It's not just what's in the classroom, it's not just the degree and the grades. And then on the flip side, to get them to start thinking about this earlier. And because it's built into core and some of these other activities, our gen ed requirements and some of these other activities, they're able to start reflecting sooner. That's kind of where we're at.
So while we're waiting, a couple questions came in while the two of you were presenting. So first to Susan, how did you approach remapping your learning outcomes?
We connect everything that we do to other things on campus. So when we were trying to forward our assessment of student learning efforts, we partnered with curriculum and the curriculum committee process and said, you know what, if departments want to make any curriculum change and put a proposal through governance, they must demonstrate and supply their program learning outcomes and show how those map to the institutional program outcomes and how their revision supports that mapping. And so that was a process over time. It really helped that we were able to win over our school deans. And in that process, the deans became 100% engaged with how to write good outcomes, the value of having clearly articulated outcomes, and how it saves governance time and saves administrative time in working with curriculum change, that you're not just making superfluous change just because it's somebody's pet project. Instead, it's because you're really demonstrating how it supports your program. So that was a slow process. I'm not going to lie, it was not an easy process, but we probably got everything done. It took us 1 year to redo our institutional outcomes. It took us about 1.5 years to get all of our program outcomes on board, because again, we were leveraging curriculum and we were also leveraging pressure from the school deans to their department chairs.
Great, thanks. And then Meena, a question came for you. Have you been able to demonstrate interoperability of your learning record with other platforms, or has it been mainly within the badge area?
So that's actually where we're headed next. So we are in the process of trying to secure some, and I guess this is the reality of the situation, is we're doing a lot of this work, and I don't know, Susan, if you've experienced this, we're doing a lot of this work before the people who are going to receive it are ready to receive it. And so we started wanting to test with interoperability. That was where we started a couple years ago and said, this is our ultimate goal. And then a couple of things we realized along the way was, one, everyone defines a lot of these skills and wants very differently. And so it's hard to find the general definition that everyone can agree upon. And then two, when it comes to interoperability, again, the tech isn't ready. In many places, the tech just isn't ready. And it is, I think, at this point about building the ecosystem that then pressures these organizations to be ready to receive it. And so right now, the benefit we have, particularly with digital badges and the fact that we're working with concentric skies, they are machine readable, they carry the metadata forward, and that learner record carries each individual badge, which means it already carries the metadata. And then we'll do a little bit of the manual interoperability, right? So finding partners who are willing to look at and understand what our students are bringing to them, and then see where we can actually get to a point where they want to sort of technically consume the whole record. And if there's another way to do that, we're in the process of trying to figure out, if there's a way that we can fast track that. But the most that we've done is much more of the, do you care about this? And would you read it? And do you want to read it? And will tagging more skills into it and showing the mapping be helpful? That's where we're at right now.
Great, and it looks like Mark is back with us, so we'll start the presentation again. All right, Mark, I'll turn it over to you, hopefully, before we lose you again.
Well, I'm sorry about that. It looks like some various network storms are hitting my particular house at this point, so I apologize for that. Let me get that up. And actually, if you click just once on the PowerPoint, there you go. As you can see, I have a striking resemblance to Brad Pitt. I know that's obvious to all of you. I do sometimes have to remind people. I simply say that because in these times, very unique times, the times of the pandemic, there is a part of Brad Pitt that I really need to talk about, and that is, man, he, you guys probably don't know this, but he goes to Fiji every summer, and he goes to do some personal appearances, and as a result, gets to spend some time in a South tropical place. Well, I often get to go along too because my resemblance is so great. Now, this year, for the first time, because of the pandemic, I haven't been able to go. In all the previous years, it was just simply because I couldn't afford it. And I know that was a long way to go for that joke, so I apologize. You go to the next slide. By the way, I'm Mark McConaughay from Indiana University in Bloomington. Those were all slides of Indiana University. It's really a wonderful place, and really hoping all the students come back in very short order. So first of all, just to set a little bit of what we're thinking about, what's a credential? Really the traditional credential is the transcript, the diploma, certificates. Really what we've been doing since, well, for the diploma we've been doing for hundreds of years. For the transcript in the late 1800s or the latter part of the 19th century, we've really put it in this sort of form in order with credit hours as the fundamental basis. We've been doing that a long time. And what's important about that is that we've established a certain level of standard and trust associated with the issuance of that credential. Thus, when people receive it, third parties receive it, they have a certain amount of trust in what was accomplished by the individual student. That has been curricular in nature. ACRO and others have started the Comprehensive Learner Record. We've already talked about that in some detail. But if you combine that, you really get an idea of just what is a credential. Could we take the experiences that are part of the Comprehensive Learner Record, the traditional aspect of a curricular record, and fundamentally tie those down to a fundamental unit. If you think of courses, competencies, and engagement activities, and you take them down to their attributes, they're really not fundamentally different. And if you think about the underpinnings of those things, as long as they have the appropriate governance and value, they're not fundamentally different. So what if we start thinking about courses, competencies, and engagement activities in the same way that we think about, sorry, I just lost my screen, in the same way that we think about our larger credentials. And so with that, what if I was applying to a pharmaceutical firm and all they really wanted to know is whether or not I had a bachelor's degree, and secondly, whether or not and how well I did in chemistry. Well, why can't a student curate the fact that they've got the bachelor's degree and here's how I did in chemistry, and that's all you need in order for me to get a job? So that's the kind of thing we're doing about it. If you'd click one more time, if you think about that, we can think about courses, competencies, engagement activities of the fundamental units, the atoms of a credential. Each one of those could be independently verified and validated and could contain an element of trust as they move through the ecosystem. And thus, if you think about those atoms, those can be combined into molecules, of course, and they become transcripts and diplomas. Next slide, please. Now, let's think about that fundamental unit and also student self-sovereignty. In the traditional model over here on the left, the way you would, an individual student would request a credential is to go to the higher education institution in which they've achieved it, request it, and have that credential set directly to the third party. If you think about student self-sovereignty, we could take those fundamental units, credentials, engagement activities, and competencies, basically give them to the student, but encapsulating them in the kind of electronic trust, just as we do with a signed and sealed envelope. Give it to the individual student, let them curate what they need, send it to the third party, and through electronic trusting agents, basically the third party could trust that in fact this was an authentic credential issued by the institution that was so named. So that's the fundamental notion that Indiana University and basically a lot of ACRA was doing as well. If you think about that fundamental notion of an atom, you do need a common standard. You need a way to fit all of these pieces together. So we were cognizant of that as well. So we basically had a number of things in mind. We wanted to create a credential, and I'll get to that in a second. We wanted to enable the trust that we already had. We wanted to do it in a standard way, and we wanted to do it in a way that could be disseminated through self-sovereignty on behalf of the student. Next slide, please. Coming together with this overall notion, at the same time, we had done a study of our first year experience program. And without going into a lot of details, there was a consulting group, and the consulting group basically said, you really need to put some more structure around the kinds of things that you are engaging first year students in, and you need to provide some incentives for those students to do so in a fundamental way. So when we did that with the support of the provost and our vice provost for undergraduate education, we put together a set of experiences organized under academics and credential, equity and inclusion, community engagement, and arts and humanities. We put that in, starting in 2018, but fully fledged in 2019. And the whole idea was to take the validation and structure of the institution, surround it with the academic activities that we were talking about, and these other activities, validate that in fact these things occurred, and if they met the fundamental eligibility criteria, issue a Hoosier Experience certificate and enable to issue that in a fundamental way that could go out to the student and be issued to a third party and be electronically verified. So that's what we were after. A couple of things to say about this that we we really were in a fundamentally good shape. One, I had the support of the Provost as we pushed through this, and all of the organizations that were part of the first year experience program, who were all fundamentally behind this. We didn't have to push through new policies, practices, or procedures in order to get this done. That was number one. Number two, our sister campus at IUPUI had already embarked upon a CLR initiative. It was called the EALR, the Experiential and Applied Learning Record. And it is just that, without again going into what the CLR is. You already know some of that, so I won't go into that, but they developed the set of data structures we needed to hang all of these experiences on. Thus, I didn't have to create a whole new record set or database in order to basically record and validate the kinds of things that we were doing with these students. So we were able to do this with fundamental governance. We were able to hang our hats on some database tables and structures that we could leverage. And then third, we had enough wherewithal to basically say, okay, once you met the eligibility criteria, we took advantage of our fulfillment partner, Paradigm, and basically said, give us something that was equivalent to an electronic diploma, but gave us a little bit more than that. One, we wanted to electronically certify that in fact this was awarded to the student. Two, we wanted to make sure that we could verify that it was issued from Indiana University. Number three, we wanted to drive down to the fundamental unit that was part of the eligibility program. So in other words, not just the fact that it had a certificate, but what was a description of the certificate and what were the experiences that the student had in order to receive and fulfillment, to receive and receive it and get awarded it. In any number of ways, I could say that particular phrase. So that's what we did. Now the next thing we did, and let's go on if we go to the next slide. So we used Paradigm. We fundamentally did this, and you can't quite see this. When I did this before, we could click for a live demo, but it's not worth it in this venue. You see the certificate on top, and you see the scholar record underneath. The scholar record underneath, once it's been verified, basically has all the metadata you need in order to understand how this particular student fulfilled the obligations of the certificate and a description of each one of those eligibility criteria. So we got down to that atom. We're able to put that atom into this overall certificate, and through the use of Paradigm, had the appropriate electronic foundation to maintain that trust component that is so necessary for institutional attestment of a specific set of skills. So the next thing I want to say, though, is we took it one step further. We recognized that in order to do this, we needed to do it with a set of standards. And the set of standards we adopted for the transfer of information from us, Indiana University, to Paradigm, our fulfiller, was the IMS CLR standard. And so what we did in all matters of transfer of information, we took from our fundamental base tables, basically put that in the IMS CLR standard, sent it to Paradigm, who consumed it in that regard, and basically presented it, rendered it in the way that you see it here. The other thing to say, though, is that we went one step further than that. Not only can you see and fundamentally consume it and render it in the way it is, we also provided a button that enables the consumer to receive all of the information in an IMS global CLR standard if they so wish, and they can consume it. That's sitting behind that button. You can't see it, but trust me, it's there. When they do click that button, next slide, please. This is what they get. Now, it's not worth looking at, but point is this is structured in a machine readable language, easy for all of you to say, and can be consumed by anyone who so chooses to do so. So that's what we did. And so we really did fulfill sort of the four fundamental things we wanted to do One, we wanted to provide an overall structure and a meaningful experience on behalf of our first-year students. We wanted it to be a trusted electronic credential. We wanted it to be student self-sovereign. We wanted them to be able to disclose it at their wish. And we wanted it at a more fundamental unit, more of an atomic structure than what we've done in the past. So overall, this has done us well. Now, the plan here was to take other types of academic and co-curricular experiences and put them into this domain. And the whole thing about the pandemic at the beginning of my part of this discussion was simply to say that has been put on hold as we make plans for the upcoming fall term. But nevertheless, once we get returned to some sort of normal state of affairs, we intend to use this foundation and this CLR standard in order to provide even further sets of electronic credentials. So there you go.
Thank you. A couple questions have come in. For Mark, can your CLR be exchanged with other products and platforms? Have you demonstrated that? Have you been able to do that yet?
We have not been able to do that yet, but before the pandemic hit, we were in search for a partner who in fact would be able to consume it. And the whole idea is that if not only institutional and academic credentials could be consumed, but also employment credentials or military credentials could be consumed in the same manner.
Susan, can you speak to Messiah's vision for getting a CLR record into the hands of students? I think you talked a lot about your process, and I think that was really helpful for people, but what's kind of the end goal with students?
So because we have our infrastructure built, we partner with APHIS for our assessment platform. And all of the information for the students is kept in that platform. And that platform integrates both our LMS and our SIS systems, our student information systems. And it is a really robust tool that can both aggregate and disaggregate data for the assessment of student learning, but it also has a feature for the CLR. And that's the way that we will be rolling this out. Before we do this, though, we need to ensure that our deans, our department chairs are really clear about what a CLR is. What do we mean by a badge? What do we mean by a credential? How does it support students? And that's our next phase of engagement, is really working on those communications to make sure that we're clear, we're concise, and that the way we articulate it is specific to the academic areas and the co-curricular areas so that they can all latch on and find meaning in it. And then from there, we have to figure out, and this is the part that probably gives me heart palpitations the most, is we want to make sure that we're working with a core group of students and student advisors to make sure that when we turn this this part of the platform on for student consumption, that they know what it means, they understand how to read it, and they understand how to leverage it for themselves and their personal growth and their personal career aspirations. And this platform will stay with students for their lifetime. It's not a subscription service, it's not anything like that. So the students control all of the information, they control what is visible, what is not visible, and that's the part that really drew us to working with this partner, is we were building off of existing momentum that we already had within our institution, and it was the same place to train advisors and faculty members to go. We want all of our people to go to that same area and have the same experience as much as possible to try to minimize the learning curves and frustrations. So right now we're really on that communication piece for the outward part of it, but we've been, COVID hit us too, and trying to figure out how do we get these stakeholders engagement when everyone is sucking air trying to figure out how to pivot for the fall and whatever the fall will bring us.
Great. Feel free, if anybody else has questions, to put those in the chat. I have a couple others that have come in to me privately, but if you have others, feel free to submit those. What has been kind of the most critical thing for success of your program so far? And I think that's to all three panelists. If you have your kind of, what's the one kind of piece that was the most critical for your institution? Meena, do you want to start?
Yeah. I think for us, it kind of is a fork in the road. It was two things that worked together. It was one, being really strategic about what we're doing, right? We could have come at this 100 different ways, and we really landed on taking things that are already accepted. They're not things we have to argue about. We don't have to argue about the value of any of these skills because the state tells us we need to use these skills. We don't have to argue about high impact practices because we know in higher education that these are things that support student success and retention. And so it was really about being strategic in that, so that our conversations and our ongoing grappling is focused much more on how do we do this, not why are we doing this. And then on the flip side of that, because the why is the student, it's students being able to access this information. And that's why I say it's kind of like a fork on two sides. And that's where the idea of the actual student dashboard came far more to the front than the learner record itself. Because if they understand what they're seeing and they never use the record, it's not our goal, but if they never use the record, worst case scenario, are they better able to articulate what they do? Do they better understand the journey that they went through while they were in college? Can they link specific aspects, and do they feel empowered to do that, right? Specific credentials or micro credentials to their records elsewhere because they don't want to use what we have, but they want to put it on their LinkedIn or whatever. That those two together balance each other out, because the why that we're pivoting around is students and what they need.
Susan or Mark, do you want to chime in on your piece of advice?
I can go. I would say the most critical thing for us is to make sure when you're talking about this on your campus that you're not framing it as something new. People are stretched very thin, especially for us at a small school. We wear multiple hats, and if you ask people to do one more thing, they tend to run away, and we didn't want that. We want engagement. So we looked very strategically at how we can move toward this direction, but do so in a way that it's not an additional item on somebody's plate. So for us at our institution, it linked very well to assessment of student learning because that was already capturing the essentials of the learning outcomes and the student performance. And we were able to get our registrar's buy-in when we said it's not something extra that the registrar's office has to manage, it's managed within our system. And that got their blessing. So that helped us to move forward to yet another step in our governance process. So making sure you're really clear about how can you distribute the work so that one person or one office doesn't feel like they have this charge to keep something new and alive and fresh and do all of these wonderful things, but do it in addition to everything else that's already being done. So we're really trying hard to link our progress to existing processes on campus. Mark?
Yeah, and I think I will just echo the same theme. I think one of the ways we've been successful at IU is that we weren't threatening a big change. That was number one. Number two, we had support of the administration. And number three, it wasn't a heavy lift. So to go all the way back, had I come in and said, you know, the way we're recording and disseminating and attesting to student success through the academic record is just simply old and fuddy-duddy, and you guys are doing it all wrong, we would have just simply died. On the other hand, something that just fits nicely into what we already do, had the data structures already in place, and was an existing initiative already in place. It just fit very nicely together under the umbrella of a strategic plan about what credentials were and the idea of fulfilling in the long haul student self-sovereignty. So if you keep those kinds of things in mind, it really was a small incremental approach in trying to drive all that. And I think by so doing, had I had to go out and both convince and get a lot of resources in order to get this done, it wouldn't happen. By the way, the one thing I didn't have to do was convince our registrar to participate.
Very good. Benefit. What has been the response from students so far? or faculty if you haven't rolled it out to students yet? How has been the response on campus to this? People are enjoying it, finding the value? What are you hearing?
I can go first because I'll tell you, we haven't rolled it out to students yet, so we don't know yet. We will be rolling it out eventually, but we'll do it in pilot groups. So we want to make sure that we learn from student experiences before we unveil it en masse, and the same with faculty and with student advisors. We really want to make sure that we set it up to be successful, and to do that, we really have to listen to the ways in which they engage and experience it and modify accordingly.
And I can jump in. So we do have it open to students. We did a live pilot with about 1,000 students right as the pandemic uprooted most of us. And so what we found from them with the students that we kind of pushed this out to, and actually one of the nice things with the way that the digital badges worked is we were able to do retroactive awards. So we were able to show students live progress, and not just from the semester that they were in. They were able to see progress over time. They generally got it. What they kind of shared with us is that, oh, this makes sense. This is something that's supposed to help me in my future. It's something that I can carry with me. I'm seeing skills. And so that was one of our big things, was them to actually recognize that it's not a gen ed English writing class that I have to take, but that within that I'm learning things like critical thinking and communication and so on. So they start to make more sense of these broad strokes courses that they feel they're forced to take. And then with faculty and staff, as a result of our pilot launch going, we've been able to show them actually the same examples we showed all of you, and they get it. And so what this has led us down is, in addition to these broader university-wide interdisciplinary credentials that revolve around things that the state already requires, is talking specifically to degrees and asking them, what are the marketable skills? What are the skills and enduring things that students are learning within your degree program that you want them to be aware of? And I think we have something like just shy of 15 to 18 degree programs that are actively mapping into their courses and outcomes the way that French did, because once they see it, they also get it, and they understand and recognize the value that it could provide to students. Notwithstanding the brand value, they can walk out as a college and as a degree program and say, this is what you get. You come to the University of North Texas in this program, you get a degree and you get this, you get these badges, you get this branded experience. And so it's carrying different value for different people, but generally it's been well received.
And I will say it's been well received, but the overall certificate has been well received, particularly by the students, for those who chose to use them and disseminate them. What I will say is it didn't spread and catch on as well as we thought it might. In other words, we didn't get a lot of students who participated. It was in the hundreds, not in the thousands, as we had hoped. But I think an even more important aspect is that I started to get inquiries right as the pandemic hit about how this platform could be used for a variety of certificates that other academic units wanted to offer. And I think that's its real value. Once we get that foundation started and it begins to get traction across campus, I think this will begin to take off. Now, they have not been engaged in this in the last 5 months, but I do anticipate that once we get over the hump here, we'll get back to offering those kinds of things.
How are you handling any concerns about privacy from students? Is there any FERPA concerns, anything like that that you've been having to address or have thought about to make sure that you're not going to have issues?
For us, the way that it's been set up is that the students receive a badge only after they've earned something, and it's private. It's inherently under the control of the students the minute they receive it. And so if they choose to share it, they can, and if they choose to never share it, they don't have to. And it doesn't carry any personally identifiable information on it other than the recipient. So they themselves carry their name on it. But whatever is in the badge and the data that travels with it is the actual evidence of what was done. And so that's kind of how they're able to turn things on and off as well, so they can control privacy over time.
Just real quick, we really put the model of student self-sovereignty in place. So they disclose at their behest, and our systems and transfer of data is sufficiently private that we have confidence that there are no FERPA issues.
For us, the badges and the certificates are mostly at this point in time based on coursework. So the only person who sees the student coursework is the faculty member in the LMS system. Once the student accomplishes the artifacts necessary to earn the badge or the certificate, then the student gets private notification, and it is up to the student to make it public or to not make it public that they have earned that particular credential. So again, the student is in control of their own information, and all of that background information of who they had for a course or what grade they earned in the course. None of that is available to an outside audience at any point in time. It's either they earned or they didn't earn. And with our platform, students can also upload the evidence of how they got that badge. So if they had an amazing paper or a project and they want to share that outward with potential employers, they can link that and add that on. But again, it's totally under the student control of how they want to display their own document of learning.
What's next for your institutions with your CLR programs?
As I said, our next thing is to figure out how do we win people over in terms of making this now available to students. We want to really nail down our messaging. We have our pilot people in place. We're ready to go from the infrastructure and academic perspective and co-curricular perspective. All of that's there and ready to be launched. Now it's that messaging component. And again, I'm chomping at the bit. I'm trying to wait for all of our professionals to get past the angst of this fall and whatever this fall is going to bring, and then starting that next round of conversations so that we can really keep this moving forward. One thing I would add in is, if you go to that model that I was sharing earlier, if you go, what we've found is if you push too hard in any one sphere, you hit limits and things tend to you get pushback. But if you can move all of those three spheres in concert with each other, the movement, the motivation, and the momentum, if you can keep all of those spheres growing, then that's when we're finding the most value for change. And that's where I'm hoping to continue to build toward that this fall and this spring.
I will just say that kind of the answer I gave last time, I think the foundation we put in place is just ready for extensibility. And I think once they've seen how, and I don't want to oversell this, but it was relatively straightforward. The hardest part by far is the governance. It is not putting the rest of it in place. And I will say, and I meant to say this as part of my presentation, but we were able to do this even without the direct partnership of our IT shop. We did this, even the CLR standard conversion, we did this with our internal resources in the Office of the Registrar. So this is eminently doable. Really the hard part is in identifying what it is you want to do and putting the appropriate governance in place so whatever it is you're attesting to has value.
Yeah, so for us, I think I alluded to some of the degree programs that we've got mapping. So those will open. So we've already got about 1,000 students in these right now. We'll be opening to the entire freshman class as they come back in the fall for interdisciplinary skills. So those will be things like communication, teamwork, and critical thinking. And then alongside them, sometime in the fall, we'll be opening to these additional degree-specific ones. I'd expect that we'll have about 8 to 10 that are ready. And so while that's happening, we're also, I think, as both Mark and I alluded to, chasing some partners who can start to actually test whether this is functional, usable, interoperable, transferable, and meaningful. And so those things together, I think, probably lay out the next 8 to 10 weeks for us, and we'll see where that goes. But we're expecting broader scale adoption, particularly through degree programs. We started with the interdisciplinary skills, and we're still leaning on that and expecting that to grow over time. But as departments and degrees are seeing the value that this gives them, they're latching on far more quickly than we expected, which is always nice. It was a happy surprise. They've latched on pretty quickly to it, and it's been leading to pretty positive outcomes.
Great. Thank you all. Thanks for joining us today. This, I think, was a very great conversation to hear from 3 institutions who've really taken the time to set a CLR program in place and start to roll it out to their campus. So I just want to make sure if you haven't had the chance to sign in to get a copy of this recording, as well as any resources that we have that go along with this, make sure you do that, as well as to mark your calendars for our next roundtable, which will happen on August 24th. And that one will really focus on the impact on students. So we have panelists from Elon University, the University of Central Oklahoma, and the University of Maryland's global campus. So that will really focus on the student impact that CLR programs can have. So thank you for joining us today, and make sure to join us in August.